I was here once before in 2010, and Anne hosted me then, and she gave me the tour of the camp and showed me the surrounding area, so I had a sense of where my own dad had made his escape now 80 years ago. It was a very emotional experience. I'm sure it is for any of you who are here for the first time. But today and these days for this event, it is even so much more meaningful because I'm here with all of you who have had a connection to the camp, who have had a loved one who was interned here, and also to be in the presence of Italians who are, as I see it, the heroes of this story, the brave Italians that we'll hear so much about in these days, who risked their lives to help the escapees outside of these walls. So, I guess you know, I'm Dennis Hill. I'm the author and administrator of this site, Camp 59 Survivors. And I write about, the camp has a broader history, as you know. I write specifically about the history of the camp during World War II, the history of the camp, and I write about the servicemen, the Allied servicemen, who were interned here in that period in time. My interest in the subject came through my dad, who was interned here. He was Sergeant Army Hill, and he was captured in North Africa. He came into the camp in May of 1943, and he escaped, as Anne pointed out, through the hole in the wall that so many escaped through that night. And this on the right is my dad before he went overseas with his elder sister Lillian and a cousin Millie, and on the other side, my mom and dad, shortly before my dad passed away in 2000, at the age of 82. On the outside of the wall, after he passed through the hole, he met up with someone he knew on the inside, a fellow American, Ben Farley. And he knew Ben well enough to know that he would be a good traveling companion, that he had the grit that it took to work through what was to come ahead. Over 31 days, my dad and Ben zigzagged some 300 miles through the Apennine Mountains to reach the Allied lines, which they reached near Ternley on October 15th. So 31 days. They were among the very first to arrive at the Allied lines of the prisoners who escaped from this camp. Here you see a map that he drew in the camp. It was drawn, you could kind of see a little bit of impression of what was on the other side, and some of you will recognize that this is a piece of stationery that the prisoners were issued in the camp to write letters home. Well, he used it to draw a map, and you see in blue and red, it's very detailed, in blue and red, rivers and roads, and there are some place names that he thought would be useful outside the camp wall and making their way south. What you don't see on that map, which you see on the topographical map, is the rugged terrain that they would be traveling through. And they knew enough to stick to the mountains. The easy way would be to travel on flatland, but they stuck to the mountains because they knew that was the safe route. That was the way that they could avoid recapture or being shot and killed. After my dad passed away, of course, as many of you wanted to know more, he had shared his story with me, but that wasn't enough. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know about camp, and I wanted to know more about the other servicemen who were in the camp. What was their experience like? And so I Googled, actually for several years, finding bits and pieces. And then in 2006, I found the Casa della Memoria site and immediately wrote. There was an email address, and Ian McCarthy answered, and in English. And he put me in touch with the very first families that I have met who had connection to the camp. And two of them are here in the room today, Judy Ingersoll and Tom Van Sluten. There were, I think, a total of 5 or 6. And we began to share, we began to email back and forth what, each of our family stories were. And then Ian sent another address and said, here's another person. And so we had to start the sharing all over again. And I suggested maybe we need to have a blog. And it was agreed that that was a good idea. And said, I guess I just volunteered to start a blog. And so the site was launched in January 2008, which was, of course, 15 years ago. And this is what it looks like. It is a website, and there are a few pages that have some background information, not very much. The main feature is the blog, which is what you see, where it says Joe Mangiesi's Longest Battle. That's the blog. And to date, there are over 500 posts. Some of them are quite lengthy. I write all the posts, but the success of the site, I really have to give to the families who share information, and people write to me out of the blue and say, my dad was in the camp, or my uncle, or my grandfather, or increasingly, as the years have gone on, my great-grandfather. And they send me newspaper clippings and letters and photographs, and then I do a kind of journalistic treatment to share their stories for them on the site. And also need to give credit, if Janet can read the thick that's here, to researchers who send me information or who make themselves available to answer questions, because I'm not a historian. And they're always on the ready to answer questions or help with clarification, and to send me things as they come across them, something that relates to the camp here. They'll share very generously with me. So there is a great deal on the site that is big picture, that covers a broader scope of what was going on at the time, more historical information. But the emphasis, the real kernel of the site as I see it, and the reason it was set up really, was to tell the stories of individual internees and their journey, and also the stories of families, the families back home who also suffered, and the families of the Italians who opened their homes and their hearts to the Allied escapees who turned up at their doorstep in need, and most often were not turned away, they were embraced. I'm going to go through quickly. I think it's good to have an overview, and these are very general, so they're not specific, they're rounded. There were nearly 80,000 Allied prisoners in Italy in early September, the time that the armistice was signed, all across Italy in all of the camps. 50,000 remained in the camps. 30,000 left the camps, as is in the case with PG-59, and 16,000 were recaptured. 10,000 were sheltered by Italians, 4,000 escaped to Switzerland, and the ones who escaped to Switzerland, and this is also the case of internees here who were transferred north to work in work camps in the northern part of Italy. It was logical for them to travel north to neutral Switzerland and through the Alps. And then many who were in this area stayed with families for longer periods of time, and some headed for the Allied lines in the south. And then from the bigger picture, back here to Camp 59. And what I'm going to be showing you is, I'm going to have some quotes because I thought it would be best to allow the players in this historical drama to have a voice, and that voice will be me as I read the quotes, and to share a lot of images, because I think that images say a lot. Really, when we go to the camp, we see the brick walls and camp inside that is now a park. And seeing images helped to bring it to life, I think. So that was what my intention was. Here, one of the early arrivals at camp, in this case, at the stroke of midnight. If you can imagine, Happy New Year. I well remember the bells of a nearby church ringing in the new year of 1942 as we went through the gates. William Redmond. And this is PG-59 chaplain Neil Nye, who writes in his memoirs, and we've heard of the tunneling a minute ago. We had several attempted escapes, but the tunnels were usually discovered. The 2 brass altar candlesticks that I had bought through an interpreter were very useful implements for digging. You get a sense of his personality, I think, here. And his full memoir, covering the period when he was in the camp, is on the website. I highly recommend you reading it because it's quite entertaining. He's quite a storyteller. Creativity flourished in the camp. Poetry, music, drawing, invention. And this lovely bit of needlework is a Royal Artillery badge, which is made here in the camp, Camp 59, by Ronald Bowens, who is known as Bertie, and was sent to me by Jeremy Bowens, Bertie's great-grandson. And you can see the small image up to the left of the badge is the back of a maple leaf cheese packet, likely from a Red Cross parcel, and of course the Royal Artillery emblem that he duplicated in needlework. And Bertie, of course, the picture of Bertie. Prisoner Dennis Crooks' daughter Maggie and I believe that he had access to a camera. This was quite a mystery how he had access to a camera in the camp. But she has a wonderful selection of photographs at home that she shared with me, and these are 2 of the photographs. And Dennis, in a letter to home, writes to his parents, "On Thursday, we are having a grand carnival. Fancy dress, sideshows, competitions. There will be a scavenging hunt and perhaps a photographer." And here on the side is Dennis. And the other 2 images are very sensitive. Sometimes prisoners were photographed in the camp. Usually they're like headshots. They don't reveal much other than what the prisoner looked like. In this case, these are very sensitive portraits. I love them. In one case, someone in training with a pipe between his teeth and arms folded, very relaxed. And in another case, someone either drawing a picture or perhaps writing in a prison camp journal. On the right are Australian Les Worthington in the hat, looking toward the camera, or on the left, and on the right is R.J. McMahon. Australians were the first to escape from the camp. Interesting bit of trivia, and they went not through the gate, not through a tunnel, not through the gate, not through the hole in the wall, but over the wall, and you'll have to read the story to know exact details of how that happened. But I have a short quote from RJ that describes, "I suggested to my mate, one Scot and 5 other Aussies, that we should try going over the top. We nutted this plan out that there would be enough time while the guards patrolling the wall having their halfway talk and smoke, giving us about 5 minutes." So if you can imagine taking advantage of that brief period of time to fly over the wall and roll on the other side, not knowing what was there. These 2 brothers, Richard and Henry Kane, were captured in North Africa together. They were in the camp here together. They escaped together, and they were on the run together. They walked only by night, and they followed the North Star and the Big Dipper. That was their way of navigating. Unfortunately, they were recaptured. They were among the recaptured, and they ended up in a Stalag together in Germany for the duration of the war until they were liberated from the camp. There are many stories of adult Italian helpers and whole families who protected POWs. Sometimes children were the heroes. In this case, 12-year-old Vitangelo Defino, who near his village of Pietrogallo witnessed the downing of a B-24 bomber, and he rushed to save the life of injured crew member Robert Delat, who was both severely burned. He lost vision in one eye, and when he landed, crash landed, really, he was bleeding, and Vitangelo rushed to the scene, and he says, "I took off the white t-shirt I was wearing, and I bandaged the wound until the flow of blood ceased, while Delat put a hand on my head and said, 'Help, help.'" And of course, here you see Vitangelo. I believe he's still living as he looks today. And another example, teenage brothers, Nicola and Liberato Lagalla, who were members, they were children in a fishing family in San Benedetto del Toro, Tronto.
Yeah, Tronto.
And they were approached for help in skippering some of the POWs who arrived at the coast south to the Allied lines beyond to safety. The brothers, after the war, were awarded the British Bronze Medal for civilian bravery. And Nicola, who is living, I know he's still living, at age 97, is in Australia. The IS-9 organization was an effort by the Allies to provide support and rescue of prisoners who were behind enemy lines. Accountant, welder, engineer, medical student, bricklayer, Catholic priest. These are all Italians who worked as Italian agents in the IS-9 effort. They were dedicated agents, and their task was to locate POWs behind the lines and to guide them to freedom. Captain Andrew Robb, who was head of IS-9 at the time, the IS-9 operation in Italy, said, of agents recently returned, 2 are hospital cases, 3 are receiving medical attention, 1 walked 24 hours through snow despite a case of malaria and a bullet wound. Another crossed the Meala with a foot too swollen and infected to permit the wearing of a shoe. So you can see what an effort that was and what these agents put into it. And I wanted to just put their images up there because these are people you don't hear about, and I wanted you to at least see their faces. And there were more. According to one escapee, American planes dropped leaflets by the thousands, offering 5,000 lira to any Italian who would help and hide and care for escapees. There were so many leaflets, it looked as though it had snowed. And of course, this is the group who headed north from the northern camps, and including many PG-59 internees. So I include them on the site. This is the Maloya Pass. It's one of the key passageways that prisoners took to reach Switzerland. And G. Norman Davison described his arrival in Edelboden, Switzerland. We walked into the village, a visitation like one sees in a Christmas card. It was beautiful and white and clean as far as the eye could see. The tops of mountains glistening in the early morning sun. You can imagine leaving danger behind to arrive in this idyllic environment and to be cared for by Swiss hosts. Patrick Cahill was hosted in Arosa, Switzerland. In this winter photo, you see little snowbanks at the base on the left and the right. He's pictured with some other of his escapees. Unfortunately, we don't know their names, or as of yet, haven't identified them. Patrick is the one holding the little dog seated on the bench. And in this summertime photo, Patrick is the one with his legs up, seated on the bench, and looking quite comfortable in this environment, which these were resorts that they were staying at, you know, in better times would have been places where people would come to enjoy their summers or to ski. This is one of my favorite topics. I love when people reach out and share information about making connection to the host families, the families of those who were the rescuers, the protectors of escaped POWs. I have a few examples of that. In this case, Ronald McCurdy's. Sometimes it was Italians who reached out first, and that was the case with Ronald McCurdy. The Corchiorino family of Novara in northern Italy wrote to him in Wales. And as you see, this is on stationery, this is on business stationery, and this, to me, is a reminder that it wasn't only the contadini. In this area, it was primarily, I think, the contadini who opened their homes and protected the POWs in the north. I think more than in this area, it was professionals, business owners, intellectuals, even aristocrats who were part of that effort, that protection effort. In 1968, Sergio Vergili brought Tony Vaca to the then deserted Camp 59, where his father was interned. And I love these photographs because it's so rare to see photographs of the camp at this period in time, during the time when it was dilapidated. You see pigs grazing in the foreground in the one photograph, and Sergio is at the gate in the other. And Tony's first impression, Sergio took me straight to the main gate and we parked. It was like stepping into a ghost town. It was quiet, just Sergio and me. It was like the world stood frozen in time without occupants. And it wasn't long after that the buildings were razed. 40 years after his escape from Camp 59, Luther Shields and his wife Jimmy visited Italy, and here you see Luther with Eugenia Pavlovna, whom Luther called Mama. And you see the joy in their faces on this reunion. Luther and Louis Van Slooten were together, but Louis was also hosted for a while by the Marizzi family. So sometimes the escapees moved around, and were protected by different families, and this is the case with Luther and Louis. And Louis says at his time with the Marizzi family, Tom Van Slooten says of his father's experience, Umberto was afraid for the family, but Grandma Marizzi said, Louis is like my son, he will stay. When my father returned to the U.S., he sent a package of items he knew they could use. In that package was a special winter coat for Grandma with a note from him to her inside the pocket. And this picture is of Luther von and his wife Anna. Luther's daughter, Judy Ingersoll, says of Luther's time with the Cesari family, Luigi and Lucia Cesari had just learned that their son, Pacifico, had been in a ship that had gone down. I think Daddy took his place. So you get this whole amazing sense of the blending of the family and the closeness between the POWs and the protector families. And Judy and Virginia, two of Luther's daughters, visited the Cesari family. This was in 2006, and their trip was covered by the hometown newspaper back in the States. John Davison met his father's protectors, the Velizzi family in northern Italy, in 2010. And here you see them meeting. And here they are at the farm. In this case, John's father labored as a POW on a work camp, which was a farm, and the farm is the protector that he turned to when he went on the run was the Padrone who owned the farm. So this is an unusual situation, but not so unusual in the north because the POWs came to know the Padrones because of this close working relationship. There's been at least one reunion in America in 2013 when the Virgilis visited the Vacas. Here you see a blended family portrait, as I see it, which includes 4 generations of Virgilis and Vacas. This is at Pike Place Market in Seattle, Washington. Anyone who knows the States very well would know that this is a real tourist attraction, one of the places everyone goes to in Seattle. And a couple of additional photos. Tony worked at the Boeing factory, Boeing aircraft, and so they got a VIP tour of the operations there, which of course thrilled them. And here, Tony and Mario using translation software where their communication skills weren't so good. And a visitation to a Native American site where they were enjoying clams. I can't give this presentation without mentioning post-traumatic stress, which affected so many POWs, servicemen who were in combat in general, but POWs, I think in particular, went through a horrific experience of long-term internment and not knowing what their fate might be. Many returning soldiers experienced this: nightmares, mood swings, anger and frustration, substance abuse. And this is Clarence Crumden and his wife, Alice. Ed writes, "My father had full-blown PTSD. He was a man with a good heart underneath it all, but he had an explosive temper through most of his life. So people are changed, their personalities are changed by the experience of what they have gone through." And here, Edwin and Wilma Rogers and Wayne Rogers told me, when Dad came back, he was a completely different man than when he left. I'll tell you one thing, we never had a problem with his drinking. That was the only time I'd seen that guy happy. And in the final category, those who did not make it back at the end of the war, and whose presence is felt by families in many different ways. Here's Canadian Lawrence Barker, and in the snapshot, he's with his parents and his kid brother in 1940 before he went overseas. Michael Lawrence Barker, Lawrence Barker's nephew, so he was named for his uncle, says he escaped from the prison camp and traveled with 7 others before being discovered in a barn of the Nazis in Quito. The Nazis set the barn on fire. When the men ran out, all but for one were shot. And the one who made it back lived to tell the story of what happened. In Canada, Barker Bay on Porter Lake in northern Saskatchewan is named after Lawrence. Robert A. Newton, named for his uncle, Robert L.V. Newton, published the story of his uncle's life in 2015. And it's a remarkable story. Took him years to write, but he was dedicated to sharing his uncle's story. For over 40 years, I worked for Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And when Robert wrote to me, it had a very personal connection because his uncle was a student at Indiana University on the very campus where I worked. Just before going into the war, he did return to complete his degree. So I particularly have a soft spot for Robert L.V. Newton. And here is Steve Dickinson at his uncle Robert's grave in Milan War Cemetery. One of several visits that he's made to the cemetery in memory of his uncle, and an inscription on Robert's headstone, just one of many, just one of thousands, yes, we know, but he was ours, and we loved him, so. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.